When my neighbor Carla Whitmore called the police on my 16-year-old son for cyberterrorism because he changed our own Wi-Fi password, I honestly thought we'd already hit peak HOA insanity. Standing there on Sycamore Lane watching 3 patrol cars light up every vinyl-sided house like a low-budget crime show, my kid Logan in flannel pajama pants clutching his laptop like it was a bomb, me holding a coffee that suddenly tasted like metal in my mouth. The officers, including Deputy Harris, smelled like burnt gas station coffee and long shifts. And you could see in their faces they were trying to work out why they'd been dragged out here to interrogate a teenager over a network name called Pretty Fly for a Wi-Fi. And that should have been the funniest thing we ever told at Thanksgiving. But what we found in Carla's basement weeks later would put her in federal custody, blow open a multi-million-dollar criminal ring, and turn our sleepy HOA street into a full-blown true crime documentary. My name is Ethan Marlowe, single dad, union electrician, professional bad life choice maker, and 3 years ago, fresh off a brutal divorce where my ex ran off with her trainer and most of our savings, I moved me and Logan into Cedar Ridge Park, thinking a quiet community with a $200 HOA fee was the kind of stability we needed. You know, kids on bikes, sprinklers on Saturday, burgers on the grill, not federal indictments. The realtor swore Carla, the HOA president, was a detail-oriented former banking executive who kept everything in order, which, in hindsight, is code for, will weaponize line 37 of the bylaws to ruin your life. But at first she looked harmless, cruising by in her pearl-white SUV, nails perfect, waving at me and reminding me my grass was getting ambitious, like my lawn needed therapy. Our neighbors, the Dombrowskis, old-school Polish couple who'd actually survived real tanks and bombs in Europe, would just smile and say American paper tyrants were nothing, that we'd be fine, and for a while we were. Logan built gaming rigs from scrap, got into a summer program at Northbridge Tech Institute, messed around naming our Wi-Fi stuff like Area 51 Guest, and Your Printer is Ours, and we laughed, because that's what normal looks like. Then Carla ran unopposed for HOA president, and, inside a month, my mailbox started spitting out violation letters like a broken slot machine. Cedar Ridge Park letterhead on heavy paper, I swear, cost more than my weekly groceries. My work van in my own driveway. Commercial vehicle, $500. The hoop Logan bought with his own money. Unapproved structure, $500. My ex's tiny herb patch. Non-conforming landscaping, another $500. Each fine like a punch to the gut. I'd already worn out wiring. Houses in 100-degree attics. The Real explosion came by certified mail. A thick envelope accusing us of broadcasting offensive digital communications that damaged community decency and patriotic spirit. And when I read further and realized she was talking about our Wi-Fi name, FBI surveillance van number 4, I actually laughed, then saw the part about further legal action, and felt my jaw clench so hard my teeth hurt. I tossed the letter in the trash, told Logan we weren't changing anything, because this was still America, and last I checked, naming your own internet wasn't a felony. But Carla wasn't playing HOA. She was running a long con, and that complaint to the sheriff about electronic harassment was the first move in a much bigger game. 3 days later, she staged an emergency HOA meeting in the community room that smelled like stale coffee and industrial carpet cleaner, sat at the head table in a navy blazer that screamed, "I'd like to speak to your manager's manager," and with her little choir of board members, rammed through a digital harmony resolution that gave the HOA power to regulate all wireless broadcasts inside Cedar Ridge Park. Fines per day, authority to bully internet providers. The whole thing passed 4-1. Because Mrs. Greer, who voted no, thought Wi-Fi was a type of houseplant. I reminded them the bylaws required 48 hours notice, not 6, and Carla flashed me that thin, icy smile and said, "Public safety emergency, Mr. Marlowe. The complaint I filed makes this exempt." And in that moment I understood, she'd engineered the entire drama around my kid's joke just so she could grab power over everyone's connections. That night, I spread those bylaws out on my kitchen table like a set of schematics, tracing each clause with the same focus I use following live wires in a dark crawl space. And sure enough, emergency only covered natural disasters and threats of physical harm, not bruised egos, so I filed a formal challenge with the state attorney general before the coffee even cooled. Logan, being 16 and allergic to backing down, responded by renaming our Wi-Fi to Carla Loves Boxed Wine. And within 2 days, the neighborhood turned into a digital protest wall. HOA Karen watch. We survived real dictators. We'll survive Carla. Courtesy of the Dombrowskis. And that's when she stopped seeing us as annoying and started seeing us as dangerous, and the harassment shifted from stupid to scary. Security cameras I'd installed myself caught Carla at 11:17 p.m., crouched by my meter box with a flashlight and what looked a lot like lockpicks. And the next morning I knocked on her door with 8x10 color prints. She answered in a silk robe that probably cost more than my truck, smiled, and called it a routine HOA electrical safety inspection at midnight with tools behind my house. And when I told her the pictures were already with the sheriff and my lawyer and that Logan's blog had just posted the video, her hands shook, the color drained from her face, and for the first time I saw something new in her eyes. Not arrogance, not annoyance, fear. What I didn't understand yet, standing there on her porch with that fake marble lion statue glaring at me, was that she wasn't just protecting her pride or her HOA throne. She was protecting a machine that stretched far under our feet and into other neighborhoods, something worth millions, something dark enough that a Wi-Fi joke really could get you hurt. Once Carla realized she couldn't intimidate me face to face, she went after everything that kept a roof over our heads, filing a complaint with the state licensing board claiming I was working unlicensed, calling my biggest client, Rockford Builders, spinning stories about ongoing investigations. And I sat in their office breathing recycled air and listening to Mr. Rockford explain that his insurance company was threatening to drop him if he kept hiring me, and the rage sat in my chest like a live wire humming against metal. She hit Logan next, calling Lincoln Ridge High and telling Principal Turner that my son was a cyberbully running hate campaigns against community leaders, and I drove over ready to walk into a firing squad, only to watch Principal Turner close the office door, lower her voice, and say she lived in Silver Creek Meadows under another tyrant HOA, that she'd read my kid's blog, that what he was documenting was abuse, not bullying, and for the first time in weeks I felt like maybe we had an adult in the room. That's when I called Rachel Kim, an investigative reporter from Channel 9 who'd made a career out of making corporate bullies cry on camera. She showed up in a battered news van, sat at our kitchen table, listened, then smiled in a way that made me feel sorry for Carla, because you could tell she smelled blood. A week later, Rachel came back with a file full of property records and old HOA minutes, laid them out like she was dealing cards, and showed me how Carla Whitmore had been president in 2 other communities, how vulnerable owners, single parents, retirees, anyone with less fight left in them, got buried in fines, pushed into foreclosure. Then their homes mysteriously bought up by LLCs that traced back to the same quiet little shell companies, flipped or held until developers came knocking. In Cedar Ridge Park, Carla already controlled 3 houses, and from the map it was obvious. Each one sat over some key chunk of buried utility. The next hit almost broke me. A Heritage Community Bank call at dawn yanking my business line of credit with 48 hours notice because community risk concerns had spooked their underwriters, basically translating as, "Your HOA president keeps calling us." And that night, staring at the ceiling, doing the math of fines and loans and legal bills, I came dangerously close to deciding it would be easier to sell, to pack Logan up and disappear. But my kid sat on the edge of my bed, laptop glow on his face, and said, "If we run, she just finds another family like us." And then he showed me what he'd built. A full documentation system pulling camera clips, screenshots, letters, timestamps, all mirrored offset. And a blog that had suddenly gone viral among HOA support groups. Donations pouring in, messages from people who'd lived the same nightmare. Even a pledge of legal help from the American Housing Alliance, who'd been tracking how crooked HOAs were poisoning the housing market. Carla, feeling the walls closing in, took one more swing and committed the stupidest smart crime of her life. At 3:17 a.m., she tried to hack into Logan's server from her home network, fumbling around trying to wipe her own footage and plant malware. But attacking a coding prodigy on his home turf was like charging a tank with a spoon, and my kid not only blocked her, but mirrored her screen, captured her keystrokes, and recorded a frantic call where she talked to someone with a heavy Eastern European accent about moving assets and protecting the basement operation. That phrase, basement operation, wouldn't let me sleep, And when Rachel looped in her contact at the FBI, Agent Dana Keller from the Cybercrime Unit, the puzzle pieces we'd been juggling fell into something uglier than we'd imagined. It started with an old permit Logan dug up at 2 a.m., a 1980s foundation improvement for Carla's house, which, when laid over historic city plans, revealed a forgotten Prohibition-era tunnel grid under Cedar Ridge Park, passages that once moved alcohol now running quietly under our driveways. That foundation work had reopened a main corridor, one branch running under the Dombrowskis, another right to our foundation. Add in thermal imaging data Logan scraped from public utility systems, and the picture turned sharp. Intense heat signatures under certain houses, power usage spikes that made no sense, a pattern where every property Carla had driven into foreclosure sat on a junction. And suddenly those insane electric bills other residents complained about weren't just bad insulation. They were someone else's machines, humming in the dark. Agent Keller and her team had been hunting an underground crypto mining and money laundering network bouncing power theft across multiple suburbs. Millions in digital currency moving through the blockchain with no physical address to raid. And there it was, under Cedar Ridge Park, using an HOA president as gatekeeper, turning basements and tunnels into a hidden server farm. And as if that wasn't enough, new chemical signatures, plus whispers from a terrified housekeeper named Lucia Alvarez, pointed to something worse than stolen electricity, synthetic opioids being cooked and packaged below our kids' bedrooms. So the kitchen where Carla had once lectured me about lawn height became, for us, a war room. Agent Keller, federal prosecutors, state investigators, civil rights attorneys, all hunched over tunnel maps and transaction charts while the smell of strong coffee and fear filled my house. And the plan was simple in that terrifying federal way. Let Carla think she'd crushed us, record every crime she committed in that illusion. I was to act beaten, maybe even talk about listing the house. Logan hardened our systems so any attempt to wipe us would just create more evidence. The FBI wired me up, set surveillance on the tunnels, and the community, now organized as the Cedar Ridge Neighbors Coalition, collected their own receipts, led by people like Mrs. Greer, who'd been quietly tracking fishy HOA expenses for years, and mailman Carl, who knew every strange envelope and awkward certified letter that had ever hit our porches. We weren't just a dad and his geeky kid anymore. We were bait holding the key junction of an international criminal pipeline, and all we had to do now was survive long enough for Carla Whitmore to step into the trap. The frame-up came on a Tuesday that smelled like wet asphalt and cheap cigarettes. Somebody broke into my work truck before dawn and tucked hard drives and schematics under the seat. Maps of our grid, crypto scripts, the kind of stuff that would make any cop's pulse jump, followed, right on cue, by an anonymous tip about the electrician behind the power theft. When Detective Martinez rolled up with a warrant, I handed him the keys and tried not to smile too much. And as they pulled out the planted drives, Carla showed up exactly when the FBI said she would, already filming, already talking loudly about finally proving his criminal enterprise, admitting on our own cameras that she knew what they'd find before anyone said a word. Within hours, Agent Keller's text traced the file straight back to Carla's home network. The attempted frame, the hack, the lockpicking, combined with Lucia Alvarez finally slipping away and telling agents about months of forced work in Carla's house, threats of deportation, armed men moving through tunnels, gave the feds everything they needed to move from watch to shut it down. Cornered people do stupid things, though, and Carla still had one more disaster to unleash. First, she hired private security to sit at the neighborhood entrances in unmarked sedans, men who filmed us and tried to intimidate anybody talking to agents. Then, when that failed, she tried to burn our home down, dousing our exterior panel and sidewall with accelerant at 2 a.m. The flames starting to crawl before Logan's smart home system killed the power and our volunteer firefighter neighbor blasted it down. Arson, attempted murder, federal tampering charges. Suddenly, this wasn't a white-collar case about fines and crypto anymore. It was life and death. And that's when SWAT trucks rolled into Cedar Ridge Park at sunrise, diesel fumes hanging low as they knocked on doors and moved families out while Carla, barricaded in her house, screamed through her speakers about deep state plots and patriots. The Dombrowskis refused to leave, calmly explaining they'd already survived worse in Warsaw, and their defiance stiffened everyone's spine. but down in the tunnels, thermal sensors showed frantic movement. People hauling gear, trying to smash drives, packing up drug equipment, and Agent Keller had to make the call. Go in, now, before Carla flooded the evidence and maybe the whole neighborhood with it. What followed looked, on later news footage, like a movie. Agents entering access points in backyards, weaving through narrow brick tunnels, flashlights cutting through dust as suspects ran, tossed boxes, slipped, while above-ground negotiators pleaded with Carla to release Lucia, who she'd dragged into the kitchen at gunpoint as a human shield. But villain plans tend to eat themselves. When Carla tried to remotely trigger pumps to flood the tunnels and destroy everything, she misjudged the timing, started the water while some of her own people were still down there. They panicked, slipped, dropped equipment, and one of them called up to the surface screaming in Spanish that she'd kill them just to bury the lab. In the chaos, Lucia bolted, racing down a passage she'd cleaned 100 times, popping up 3 blocks away at an old service entrance, gasping and sobbing as agents surrounded her. And that was the moment the last prop under Carla's story collapsed. A living witness, safe, telling everything. They found Carla Whitmore herself hunched in a maintenance tunnel near the old rail line, soaked, shaking, clutching a waterproof pouch with passports and ledger codes. The queen of Cedar Ridge Park reduced to a cornered criminal blinking in flashlight beams, and I watched the footage later, that moment when they cuffed her hands behind her back, and I swear I could feel my shoulders finally drop for the first time in months. The perp walk happened in a downtown subway station at rush hour. Agent Keller read out a list of charges: racketeering, drug trafficking, cybercrimes, harassment, false reports, attempted murder, and Carla tried to shout about being a community leader. But the crowd just lifted their phones, people cheering when they heard words like restitution. And when Rachel Kim shoved a mic toward me and asked if I had anything to say, I looked into the lens and told the truth. I named my Wi-Fi as a joke, I said, feeling the whole insane story sit behind my ribs. Turned out we actually needed the FBI, because our HOA president was running a criminal tunnel under our homes. Funny how fast harmless power turns into real power when nobody checks it. 6 months later, Cedar Ridge Park feels like a different zip code. Carla's seized mansion is now the Cedar Ridge Commons Garden, where Lucia Alvarez plants herbs between her criminal justice classes on a full scholarship paid out of forfeited assets. The HOA board is all new, fees are lower, budgets are transparent, and when they asked me to be president I laughed, said I'd rather wire a stadium than run an HOA. And we put in term limits so no one ever builds a throne there again. Logan got into Northbridge Tech Institute on a full ride, wrote an essay about what I learned taking down a criminal HOA, now consults with agencies on digital evidence, and his app HOA Sentinel helps thousands of families log abuse. A federal reform package folks call the Cedar Ridge Act forces audits and limits some of the worst HOA tricks, and somewhere in a federal prison, Carla is watching a world move on without her. As for me, I still wake up before dawn sometimes, listen for sirens that don't come, walk out to my truck, breathe in the cool air, and feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace, and a stubborn pride that we didn't roll over, that a dumb Wi-Fi name and a kid with a laptop were enough to trip a giant. We rebuilt more than one house here. We rebuilt how we look at power, at neighbors, at what community means when someone tries to own it. And I'll be honest, there are days I still wonder where the line is between petty revenge and righteous pushback, between a teenager trolling an HOA and a father risking his kid's safety to chase justice. So I'm asking you, right now, if you'd been me, if your HOA president had the power to wreck your job, your home, your child's future, and you discovered they were running crime under your feet, how far would you go to stop them? Where's the line between self-defense and going too far? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me your worst HOA horror story, what you did or wish you'd done. And if you want more real stories where suburban tyrants finally get audited by karma, hit like, subscribe, and stick around, because this fight over power, property, and justice in little neighborhoods like mine, it's not over yet.